Well, good morning, everybody. I tell you, it's always a great problem to have when you have to add chairs. It's wonderful to spend part of Saturday with you all. I'm joined by Ginny B. Butler. We're going to talk about Federal Hill today. I'm Robert Boone. I'm the executive director here at the Kentucky Gateway Museum Center, and loving it. And it's great seeing you all. It's great seeing you all. And we've had a busy month. Just a few things that we've had going on. We started the month with a wonderful KSB miniature workshop, which had 37 participants from around the globe. It was fantastic. And then that really corresponded with a wonderful exhibit, Scale to Perfection, Encore and More, which is going to be up until early January in the Calvert Gallery and in the atrium, an expansion of the KSB miniature collection. And I encourage everyone to go down and view it. It is fantastic. Across the hall in Warmald, of course, we have a Federal Hill exhibit, which we'll talk more about Federal Hill today. Last night, it's great to see Steve Vest and Kay Vest here from Kentucky Monthly. Last night, we were part of the celebration for the 25th anniversary for Kentucky Monthly magazine, and we lost count. We had so many people. It was a meet and greet, so people were coming and going, but we at least had 70 people, maybe 100. So it was a wonderful event. On the 24th, we're going to have a pop-up trivia night starting at 6:30 at the Old Pogue Experience. So it'd be great to see you all there. And then we are hosting in June the State Museum and Heritage Alliance. They're actually coming today for some planning. That's June 2nd through the 4th. And that's going to be a statewide conference held here in Maysville with the topic of accessibility and innovation in museums. And the museum is the host of that conference. So very, very thankful for that. We also have a partnership event on May 11th that we'll talk about regarding Federal Hill. So we'll go ahead and get started once we get all the chairs in, and really excited to talk with you about Federal Hill this morning.
Colonel Thomas Marshall was a true American patriot. He was born in Virginia and as a young boy went to school with George Washington. They became friends and were steadfast friends throughout their entire lives. Colonel Thomas Marshall became, and this shows a chart of the Marshall family. He and his wife had 15 children, one of which was became Chief Justice John Marshall. And another one, Thomas Marshall, who came here and built Federal Hill, and there are many other Marshall descendants. And I see some of you sitting in the audience, and I'm actually descended from several different lines, and you all might be. So downstairs in the display room, you can find this huge circle, and you might see some of your ancestors right on that. Well, Colonel Thomas Marshall fought in the French and Indian War. He did surveying with George Washington in the wilds of Virginia, which later became Kentucky and West Virginia. And he was in the Virginia Convention in 1776 when they voted that we should have independence from England. He started a group of Minutemen, and then he convinced his two oldest sons to join with him, John and Thomas. So they immediately began fighting for independence. There's lots of stories, but I'm going to tell you my favorite. What? Oh, sorry. Anyway, it was the Battle of Brandywine. Colonel Thomas Marshall was there fighting, and they were trying to hold off the British Army, which had many more guns, many more soldiers, but the Patriots were so brave in fighting. While fighting, his horse was shot out from under him. So Colonel Thomas did not quit. He got up, found another horse who lost his rider, jumped on that horse, began fighting to continue the battle. This horse was also shot out from under him. He still did not get up. He grabbed another horse, continued fighting. Then his general was shot. So Colonel Thomas Marshall took command of this group, fought, held off the British, and we won the battle. Because of this bravery in this battle, he was awarded a beautiful ceremonial sword by the Virginia legislature. Here is the sword, and the museum is so fortunate that a great-granddaughter of Colonel Thomas Marshall donated this to the museum, and it is one of our prized artifacts right here. And you can see it. If you have not seen it, you need to stop on your way out and make sure you see the ceremonial sword. The battles continued going on, and during the winter of 1777, it was one of the coldest winters ever, and the soldiers were camped at Valley Forge. One of my heroes, Thomas Jefferson, said he had to go home and take care of his plantation. He left. They went from 11,000 soldiers to under 5,000. Some were killed, some were hungry, and some just deserted. But Colonel Thomas Marshall, his son Thomas Marshall, and his son John Marshall stayed with George Washington all through the winter. And they were there on the Christmas Eve night when George Washington decided they would do a surprise attack on the British. So you've probably seen the picture of the boat where they are crossing the river for the surprise attack. I had a great aunt, Mary Pickett DeBell, that lived in Flemingsburg, and she was a genealogist. So she had done a lot of research on the Marshall family. And she said, since they were such great friends, she knows our relative, Colonel Thomas Marshall, was in the boat with George Washington crossing the river. So luckily, because of their bravery and many other patriots that were so brave during the Revolutionary War, we won the war. So then Colonel Thomas Marshall was given the title of Surveyor General, and he came to Kentucky to distribute lands to the soldiers who had fought during the war. He lived in Versailles and he built a place called Buck Pond and lived there with his youngest son, Louis. But then later, he decided to move back to Mason County with one of his elder sons, Thomas. So he moved back here in 1800 and lived here for 2 years. And then when he died here, he is buried in the cemetery right there at Federal Hill. So Robert's going to tell you some about Federal Hill.
So as you all know, context matters so much in history, and we have this wonderful context that Ginny B has provided regarding the genealogy of the Marshall family. And with the property, what is in a name? What is the Federal Hill designation? What does that title mean? Later known as Federal Hill, of course, also the Marshall House. So for some context, federal architecture really was really birthed out of democracy and America as a new nation. It really was a very patriotic look at the Regency style of architecture in England in a way to make something uniquely ours after the American Revolution, really in the 1790s to about the 1840s in Kentucky. And Mason County has so many wonderful federal buildings and houses, Federal Hill being one of them. Also Washington Hall in Old Washington, Jim Moose's house in Old Washington. Phillips Folly has some federal elements along with its cousin, Georgian and Greek Revival. The January House, the Old Courthouse, all these are federal style buildings and houses in Maysville and Mason County. What's interesting about Federal Hill is early Kentucky brick home, federal style. And that's interesting because around this time, we have several examples of stone homes that are federal style. This one was an early brick home dating from as early as 1795, really circa 1800. We're certainly safe to say that. So, as an early brick home, it is one of the earliest in Kentucky. And as America's first style, again, federal style came out of this new nation. You see a lot of star motifs, a lot of eagle motifs in federal style that were added later. And it really is representative of democracy. When you look at ancient Greek styles of architecture, that is being mirrored into federal style. And again, in the federal style's cousin, Greek revival, with columns of Ionic, Doric, Corinthian columns. So all those are part of the federal style, also known as the Adam style of architecture. Again, we borrowed so much from Great Britain. We also borrowed this style and made it our own, known as Regency. It's really funny when we were sitting on the porch during the KSB miniature workshops, and I can't remember the lady's name. She came from England, and she showed us a picture of her home, which was an 1820s home in England. And I said, "Oh, that's a beautiful federal style home." And then I went back and said, "I mean Regency." I mean Regency. So it's just funny that there's so many similarities in those styles. The Federal Hill is in very good company. There's also another Federal Hill in Bardstown, Kentucky. And these homes are contemporaries. My old Kentucky home dates back to 1795, the rear portion of my old Kentucky home, the Federal Hill of Bardstown. The more famous front was added in 1818. So really the front of Federal Hill in Bardstown is later than the Federal Hill in Old Washington, which I think is very interesting, but still contemporaries nonetheless. So a lot of the research that we cite, and one of the most widespread research pieces about Federal Hill is from the U.S. Department of Interior from 1936. So I'm going to cite a little bit in this presentation from this U.S. Department of Interior survey. You see here that this is the current home. You see this porch and this pediment here. Well, in 1800, circa 1800, you see that the federal home of Federal Hill looks quite a bit different. It looks a lot more like the Federal Hill in Bardstown. So what we think happened, and what's really justified looking at the 1936 report, is there was either a huge settling issue. You've probably seen this by driving by the home, or if you've been up to the property, or an early earthquake, probably shortly after the home was built. So you see a lot of damaged brick and a lot of leaning of the home structure. So prior, no later than 1840, this porch was added. And this pediment here, generally what would happen is it would not be part of the roof line. This one is part of the roof line. This is a, no later than an 1840s addition. Normally this pediment would extend out. Think next door to Phillips Folly, the pediment extends out to the porch balcony. So that's an interesting architectural feature, but we think this happened for both aesthetic and structural reasons. Aesthetic, because the home's brick shifted during the earthquake or the settling, and structurally it needed something else to kind of help hold it up. So this porch is a much later addition. The home looked like this probably in its early days of construction. You also see the doorway is different. We think that the brick was destroyed in the settling or the earthquake. So and you can see here the difference in the brick. The front door was narrowed in, and the window removed from the top. So this is a little bit of a citation from the U.S. Department of Interior survey from 1936, just talking about the porch addition and why it may be like that. And I can send these slides out. But the architects and the historians in 1936 talk pretty much at length about the home and these various additions. What is really interesting too is we think that the home maybe had 2 or 3 additions over time, and that's really demonstrated when you look at early bricklaying in Kentucky in particular. These 3 methods of bonding of brick in Kentucky are present in Federal Hill. You have the English bond, the common bond, and the Flemish bond. And these bonds are really in different parts of the home. We think that the kitchen, correct, Ginny B, is the oldest.
We think the kitchen was the oldest, And then it was added on. And one of the stories we've heard is when Colonel Thomas Marshall moved back to live with his son, Captain Thomas, that they added on the ballroom on the far right of the house and with a huge bedroom upstairs for them. So then it was actually like 3 different add-ons.
Absolutely. The ballroom is my favorite room in the house. When you all visit on May 11th, you'll see a lot of ornate plaster work in the home. That's not original. We think that probably came from the 1930s or so. But it's a beautiful ornamentation for the ballroom. But typical of Federal style, that would have been a lot more. It would have been a lot more plain, but very symmetrical. And you can see, let's see, some of the, maybe it's in the later part of the presentation, some of the fireplace work. It would be very much like that. On the 3rd floor, and again, this is from the 1936 survey, and speaking only of the home's design and structurally, we have what was believed to be refractory slave quarters on the 3rd floor, a cell room and a punishment room. This door and this oak block is very interesting. Like very typical of all old homes with original doors, you have a skeleton key entrance lock system. Normally, in a lot of old homes, you can peer through that lock and see into the room, especially if there are windows illuminating the room. What's interesting about this is this oak block was designed on the interior covering the faceplate where the skeleton key would go in. So the room could be locked, but no one could see in or out of the room, which demonstrates that the 1936 survey is probably most likely correct, that these were slave quarters on the 3rd floor. What's also interesting is this oak beam, which is part of the floor joist system of the house. You see there's a ring here, and it was believed that this was a ring for shackles for house slaves in the home on the 3rd floor. When you look at slavery at Federal Hill, which is a topic really in and of itself, and just looking at the structure of the home and its design, this is the ring in the oak beam on the 3rd floor that is cited here in the 1936 survey. This is the ring from the oak beam for the Anderson slave cabin, slave pen that was moved from Mason County to the Freedom Center in Cincinnati. So you see many similarities between these two. The photo on the left is Federal Hill. The slave cabin, now in Cincinnati, originally from Mason County, is on the right. So we thought we would show a video, and this kind of gives some aerial perspective of the property. If Candace, if you wouldn't mind hitting play. Two upcoming events. We're time traveling today because today is the presentation. Living History at Federal Hill, May 11th from 11 to 4. Really encourage everyone to go. This is going to be a wonderful time to see the home in person and learn about life during various time frames, particularly early part of the history of Federal Hill.
Yeah. All right, you'll actually be able to go inside the house and see the first floor, and there will be living history docents in there, guides in there to tell about each of the rooms. Also, we will have a guide in the land office to talk about that. And while we were working on the house, we found some very old deeds that are very interesting. I brought them down to the museum, and they have framed them to save them. And one especially, Bruce, who does so much work for us, called me one day and he said, "Oh, you're going to be so excited. I found some original land deeds." So I was so excited, and it's about this big, and it's back from the 1700s, where the Marshall family is deeded thousands of acres there, and I'm so excited. And I called my cousin Bill Marshall and said, "Oh, guess what we found?" And he said, "Well, did you look and see, is there a place torn off?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, there is." It was Patrick Henry's signature. Oh. I know someone through the years has torn this off, and I guess to sell it, but we still have the rest of the document, and we do have another document that does have his signature on it. You'll also be able to see the cemetery, and Bill Marshall will be there. He's kind of head of the cemetery, and he has a lot of information on the genealogy and who is buried there. So, and we're going to have craftspeople set up throughout the around. Everything's hopefully going to be in the backyard. We're hoping for good weather, but we have some tents reserved just in case. But Jeanette Toll, a resident quilter, is going to be there showing how they did Native American quilts. Brenda Williams is going to be doing basket making. I just found out today we have someone that's going to come and demonstrate caning, which they cane their chairs. We're going to do pioneer cooking over an open fire. Burgoo, Johnny cakes, probably some kind of an apple drink. And through research, we found out the oldest cookies were called jumbles. And we found the recipe for that, so you can taste that. We will have a few other food trucks selling some period things, but these are all just samples that you can have. We found an old croquet set out in the barn, and Ernie Siders, who's done a lot of work for us, has restored the old croquet set. So we'll have that set up if people want to play croquet. Some of the DAR ladies, and with the help of the CAR, are going to have Pioneer Toys and Games for children going on at the same time. Ken Swenson has done a painting that we're going to have there. He has donated, and he also took some friends up and did plein air painting one day, and so we'll have some other paintings of Federal Hill that I'm not sure exactly what we're going to do yet, if we're going to sell chances but I mean, they are going to be available, and we're hoping to make some prints of the house. We keep adding things every day. We want this to be an event to celebrate all our early patriots and pioneer life. I'm going to have speakers throughout the day portraying Colonel Thomas, Captain Thomas, some of the neighbors coming to visit, some people talking about early farming, some speakers talking about the enslaved people and what they did to help. So these people could live. But looking at this picture, you can see we need to do lots of work. Luckily, we got it in time that we've been able to do the brickwork. The 2 chimneys that you could see were falling down. And luckily, we've got them rebuilt. We've got the building stabilized. We had to do some work underneath, too, to make it more stable underneath the house. Now we're waiting on a roofer to come. And then once that's done, it will be secure. But we're very thankful for people that have given donations, especially the Fryman family that donated, Lisa Fryman and her daughters. Jim and Claudia Moose bought some land immediately surrounding it and have made it into a conservation easement, so we will have green space around it. Especially we thank Elizabeth Wallingford, who was a retired teacher and left her money so we could have money to save buildings in Washington. But since this is such a big project, we need help. So when you come on May 11th, everything will be free, but any and all donations will be appreciated to help us restore the house. And you can see we have lots of work to do.
And there are some flyers advertising the event in a little bit more detail about what will take place on May 11th. And I should say that we've been recording, and thank you, Candace, for so many recordings that we have of our Saturday seminar series here at the museum. We're going to open up a YouTube channel, and this and subsequent Saturday seminars, as well as other seminars, can be accessed, recorded, archived on the YouTube channel. So, and we will post that on Facebook when it's ready to be viewed on YouTube. We know we have so many people, as they say, Maysville is the center of the universe, right? We have so many people all over the world with a connection to our region, our service area. So we want to have a global impact. We're going to do more online, especially with our seminar series, recording them and uploading them for, Tom Anderson, for example, in California, I know would love to watch these seminars. And that's just one of many examples. So be on the lookout for those. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes. I know first things first, it needs, everything. But are there any plans? I have 2 questions. Are there any plans to remove the porches and things that were added later to widen the door back to its original state? To have it original?
Not at this time. The main thing we want to do is stabilize the building to keep it safe. So that's the brickwork, which we've done. And the second thing is the roof. That way we'll keep all the moisture out, and then we will go from there. This is the first phase that we're doing right now.
And the porches there, both of them are still an early addition.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Bill?
Just a point, you might talk to them about parking at the college on May 11th.
Oh, thank you. You can park at the college on May 11th, and a trolley will be running from the college parking lot, and continuously all day to bring people over.
Sally has a question.
Sally.
I got a question. Why are there 2 chimneys on one side of the house and 1 chimney on the other? Can you tell me a little bit about that? It's just kind of interesting.
Well, inside there's the kitchen, but then when you go in, there's 2 rooms, a dining room and a parlor, and they both have nice size fireplaces with those chimneys. And if you remember, I said that the ballroom was an add-on later. And so it has 1 fireplace right in the center of that room. One of the interesting things, one of my cousins, Julie Cleaver, has been doing some research. So she found some letters talking about people coming to Marshall Key's wedding reception, which is the early 1800s. And after they had the reception down at the Marshall Key house, then they said they went to the mansion on the hill for a lovely dance in the ballroom. So we just keep digging up more history all the time. So
We think there may have been a frame addition too, a wood frame addition on this side of the house. But we need to learn a lot more about that. But I remember that when you mentioned chimney, Sally, because there is only one chimney on that side, and you can see in the brickwork where there probably were beams and joists, maybe with a wood frame addition of some sort at some point in time.
Jean.
I noticed the red tin roof needs to be repaired, but was the tin roof original?
No.
It would have been cedar shingles originally, in circa 1800. We think that the roof is mainly a barn roof, probably, that was put on at some point in the home's history to protect it. But the trust is investing in a metal standing seam roof, which would be appropriate for the time period, just not cedar shingles.
Jackie.
Who were the last marshals who lived in the house?
Well, Tommy Fryman's mother was Louis Marshall.
Mr.
And
and
she-
Mrs. Fryman.
Yes,
Right.
yes. She was a marshal.
Okay, now
Yeah.
the cemetery, is that still open for a marshal can to be buried in?
Yes, ma'am.
Bill.
There's a Marshall Cemetery, Federal Hill Incorporated, which maintains the cemetery, and unfortunately, we're still going and getting ourselves planted.
Oh, well, my daughter lives in California, and she was working at a library, and one of the other librarians there found out she was from Kentucky, and she said, "Oh, I will be buried." And Carla kind of looks like this, I live over
You're the
5
universe.
miles.
There's your cousin Julia.
And she said, "I've never been there, but I'm a member of the Marshall
Well,
family."
that's not Julia. I don't
Oh.
know who it is, but our test is that you're a blood descendant of Colonel Thomas Marshall or the significant other of somebody that is.
So remember, he had 15 children, and there's this huge genealogical cycle, and it goes out in many directions. So there's many descendants.
That's right. And, to date, we haven't been overrun, but maybe we will.
Was the land granted to the Colonel Marshall? It was about 2,000 acres, I understand, something like that. Was that for his work in the war, or did that happen?
He actually got some land because of his work in the French and Indian War, and then also received some land from Revolutionary War. You want to add on, Bill?
Okay, so the problem was at the end of the Revolutionary War, money wasn't worth a continental, but they had all these soldiers who had fought in the war, and they were quite frankly worried that these people had just demonstrated they knew how to overthrow a central government, and they were going to send them all out. And if they're restive and unhappy, bad things might happen. So somebody came up with the idea that, well, we could pay off with British land, because at that time, originally, Britain thought that they gave us everything to the watershed of the Allegheny Mountains. So they were going to pay off with land that was west of the Allegheny Mountains. Turned out it was British land, but who was to know? And they needed somebody to come over here. And Colonel Thomas, as surveyor of Kentucky, his job was figure out who in Virginia owed land to. Come over here and plot it off. So he basically designed where the towns and so forth would be in the area. Then figure out what you were going to give to each one of them. For that, he got half of everything he surveyed. So it was not 20,000, it was over 100,000 acres, but it was scattered all over because he got to take some here and some there and so forth. So I don't know whether that answered your question, but that's kind of a.
Do you have a question?
I do. Is there original furniture, and did Simon Kenton sit on some of the furniture? I've heard that.
We're not real sure. We're hoping that maybe Lisa Fryman, who gifted it, might come maybe 11th, and she might have some insight
We did,
as to that.
we did find some early photographs, probably maybe 1880s, 1890s photographs. And those are downstairs in the exhibit, along with a couple pieces of mantel clock and some candlesticks that you can see photographed in the 1880s, 1890s photography. So there's definitely early furniture, maybe
Mhm.
not original to the home's construction in 1800, but definitely early furniture.
Yes, and we found some old couches up in the attic that had kind of lost their upholstery and their stuffing, but they're old. I don't know if they're original old, but they're 1800s. Okay.
Were you referring to the great New Hampshire earthquake, 1811, 1812?
We don't know. I mean, that certainly could have been the one. I just know from research that it was around the time of the home's construction. So that may be a margin of error of 10, 15 years, or that might have been a smaller earthquake that happened just a couple of years after the home's construction. But
Kentucky felt that quake.
absolutely. And that could have been the one. It definitely definitely caused some damage.
But we have had experts come and look at the house, and they think, even though it's like, especially the upstairs big bedroom, it's kind of slanting some, but they think it's stable.
It's stable.
It's stable.
It's been that way for almost 200 years now.
Yes, yes. But we had them check it out before we started to work.
Yeah.
Another question?
Are there other houses around or buildings where the slave punishment was on third floor? I find that so, man, I can't imagine sleeping on the second floor
Mhm.
and having a punishing place upstairs. You know, you'd think they'd be outside in a different building. It's just
And
amazing.
I'm citing the 1936 survey. That's what they thought. I think there probably are homes. I don't know any offhand. I know my house, Phillips Folly, has a third floor room that also has a ring. But this one is in the ceiling. So there are homes I know that are early that where house slaves did stay, usually on the third floor of a home
But to be shackled.
or in the basement area.
There's just not much.
Oh, no, but
We don't have much documentation
There's not
on
much
that.
documentation. Mm-mm. Other
On
than the
that.
1936 survey, there's no other documentation that I found.
Right.
So that may not even be correct, but that based on the research done, that's from 1936. That's what
Uh-huh.
Is there a basement in Federal Hill?
there's a small basement area, and
Yes.
some of it's dirt, sort of crawl space, but there's a small basement area.
Yes, and that's we had to do some brickwork down there to sturdy the house.
Would that have been like a fruit cellar, perhaps? The cellar, the basement, or whatever? Would that have been?
Probably, but we're not really sure.
Don't get me wrong, I'm really happy to see what's going on now. But what happened as far, and Bill comes to our meeting, he's explained it before, but just for the sake of asking, why did it take so long for somebody to take an interest in the house as far as restoring it and stuff? The roof's gone, the chimneys are falling over.
There was always an interest. Tommy Fryman talked to me several times before he died. He was seriously ill, and he did not want it to be a burden for his wife and children, and just really didn't know how to handle it. And then the same thing after he died. I met with the wife right after it happened, and she wanted to do something, but then she really wasn't sure what to do, and time just kind of passed. So the good thing is that we got it, because with the chimneys falling that were on the kitchen side, they could have easily pulled off the kitchen and part of the house if they had fallen.
The chimneys, the house, it was like that when I was up there. I mean, it was before the restoration started.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You could see daylight between
they were on the verge of falling.
Thankfully, those are fixed now.
Yes. So we were lucky to find a good brick maker, or not brick maker, but bricklayer to come and, do work and stabilize it. So we're very thankful, but it was expensive and the roof will be expensive. So we appreciate any and all donations to help save it. Yes.
Any restoration done at all inside other than what you?
No, we're doing the brickwork and the roof first. And then, well, we did have to clean it. Some raccoons had gotten in and we had to trap them and get rid of them and, do cleaning. So.
Is there heat running water?
It's not hooked up.
But there is a more modern furnace and HVAC system, probably I don't know, from the 70s or 80s. It has everything run, just not functional.
Right. We don't have that in the budget yet. Okay.
Are there any records on how many slaves were housed there at the height of the Eustis Farm?
We have actually Bill has found the will of Colonel Thomas Marshall, so we have some records from that, but it's not real accurate. It'll tell like families or a first name, or I don't think we have a number, do we, Bill?
We don't. And kind of a background, how did the house get this way and so forth. Quite frankly, the Marshalls lived pretty large. They had lots of land, and they were big people on campus and so forth. And they, quite frankly, didn't farm much because they had enough land that they could give half of it away to somebody to farm it and just take the proceeds. And I just found a book that was written in like 1921 about this house, and you think it was bad now, brickwork might not have been, but it was in really sad shape in 21 because it had the original house, the original roof on it, and that was what there was holes showing it and so forth. So what happened was they'd throw a party, they'd sell some land, they'd have less money coming in, and somebody would leave and they would sell their land and go off in some place. And so Louis Fryman, Tommy's mother, wasn't even born when her father died. Her father was a medical doctor, and he went and caught, and I can't remember what the disease was, but he went to some outbreak of disease, and so she was born into a farm that didn't have much land left, and they were just trying to hold the thing together. My grandfather came back in the 1930s. And one of the things they asked him was come figure out why is this thing settling? And the reason was they didn't have any leaf troughs on it. So all the water was coming off the roof, going right down to the foundation, getting it wet, and then over time it would settle. He got leaf troughs on it and got the water away from it in the 30s. As you look at the pictures, it's obvious that leaf troughs haven't been maintained. So if we don't, when we get the roof, we've got to do leaf troughs or we're going to settle it more.
And to Bill's point, this is the shortest sentence in the 1936 report. It is a mess. In 1936, shortest sentence in the report.
You're talking about the house being in disrepair. I didn't realize till just a few months ago that Mount Vernon, George Washington's birthplace, nearly collapsed in disrepair. The daughters of the American Revolution thing.
Hmm. There any more questions?
Well, thank you all. Don't forget to visit the exhibits downstairs.